This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 1. This is so exciting.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramzi Majaba. Did you know he only shaves once a week? He claims he has very sensitive skin. We hope you enjoy it.
Hey all, first off, thank you to my beautiful wife for this intro. I tried getting my 2-year-old son to say that sentence, but he ended up singing Old MacDonald. Not much use for this episode, although he was very talented. Now, thank you all for joining me. My name is Ramzi Marjaba. I'm the sales engineer at Spire Communications. I've been there for the last 4 years. A little bit about my motivation, why I want to do this podcast. So, I am located out of Ottawa. I'm the sole sales engineer that covers the Ottawa region. So I've been on my own. I've been isolated from the rest of the sales engineering team. And I think that goes for a lot of people in the sales engineering environment where we work remotely. So I've been looking for resources to help me become a better SE. But all I can find is stuff for salespeople or like technical stuff, really technical stuff. Not much for technical people who enjoy the sales part of it. So nothing about POCs or demos or anything like that. So I decided to talk to as many people as possible, and it dawned on me that I can record that and make it available to anybody who would want to listen. So this is the first podcast, and I would love it if you enjoyed it, or if you didn't, to leave an honest review and have a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also get to your show notes, or my show notes, on wetheSalesEngineers.com/show1. My first guest is Bill McCarel, who was my manager at Spire Communications. We've had many one-on-ones, and I learned a lot from those one-on-ones. So I decided who better to have as the first interview than Bill. So without further ado, let's get started. Thanks again, Bill. I know I already said that, but put it on record on the first podcast. You're the first guest for this podcast, hopefully of many. Hopefully we won't stop at one. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for accepting to meet with me online. And if you wanted to say a few words about yourself so that whoever that one listener listening can know who you are. And
yeah, absolutely. So my name is Bill McCarel, and I have, my goodness, I added this up. I have 30 plus years in the technology industry, going all the way back to my folks who were small business people selling Commodore 64s,
okay.
Right before there was an IBM PC. But out of college, I went to work for a company called Electronic Data Systems. And that was my first introduction to technology, specifically network technology. Was also my first opportunity to have a little taste of leadership as a team leader. But from EDS, I went to the network equipment manufacturing side of the business and pretty much have been there the rest of my career. So companies like Synoptics, 3Com, McData, Cisco, Extreme Networks, and then most recently Spirent.
Okay. And were you always in sales, or was it like what were your roles in those different companies?
Systems engineer, Ethernet on Cat3 unshielded twisted pair wiring. And then I kind of progressed up through the SE ranks, doing an SE specialist role. Back in the day when there were other networks besides Ethernet, there was Token Ring, there was FDDI, there was ATM, and a technology called LAN emulation. Okay. So I was, I guess you would probably, to generalize it, a high-speed networking ATM specialist. But then I got a chance to go into SE management. So I did first-line SE management. I also did second-line SE management, where I had a team of managers reporting to me. But my move to McData and then my tenure at Cisco were all individual contributor roles, and they were all in the channel.
Okay.
So I supported, at McData in the early part of my career at Cisco, I supported IBM as a reseller of our fiber channel storage area networking equipment. So IBM Canada, IBM in the upper Midwest. I then moved into some ecosystem partner management roles, working with NetApp, with VMware, with Microsoft. And then at the end of my tenure at Cisco, I was doing data center partner development, working with our resellers and integrators around our data center product set, which was our UCS x86 platform and our Nexus switching platform.
Okay. So if we can take a couple of steps back, you mentioned a couple of terms here, like specialist SE. Do you mind explaining that to whoever's listening? That maybe now it's two people.
Sure. Absolutely. So the systems engineering role, or SE, was a pre-sales role, teamed with an account executive, and the responsibility being to divine and define the technical solution for the customer, right? As an SE specialist, I was an overlay, so I supported multiple regions, and I was the expert that could jump on a plane in Chicago and show up at a customer call in Dallas to augment the technical knowledge and experience that the local system engineer had. So I was a sales overlay as a specialist.
Okay, so the local sales engineer has general knowledge of a lot of products. You were specialized in one or two products.
Correct.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
And those products tended not to be beyond the local SEs, they just tended to be the newest thing, right?
Okay.
So, and where they had to be a generalist and their knowledge was always additive,
Yeah.
a specialist had the benefit of having to know one thing really well, really fast.
Yeah, I know the feeling. All right, so we've been saying SE for a bit right now, and maybe we should discuss that a little bit. What is an SE specifically in your mind, or in the, I guess, industry's mind?
So typically, and this is, I guess, speaking for the industry, typically a systems engineer is a pre-sales resource, meaning they are a part of the cost of sales and that the customer does not pay for their time, right?
Yeah.
Even though they may design the solution, they may install a proof of concept and help the customer do that. They may ultimately even be involved in the customer's initial installation, smaller scale initial installation, but they're a cost of sales. So they are the technical half of the sales team. So just like you don't pay a salesman to walk into your shop to sell you their solution, you don't pay a systems engineer to walk in and design that solution. So they are pre-sales as the technical half of the sales team. Their job is to match a technical solution to the customer's business problem.
Okay. So you would say part of their job is to actually understand what the problem is. Like once they go into a customer meeting, they kind of have to, it's their job to ask the technical questions to understand what the customer needs, right?
Agreed.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I think, one of the questions that sometimes comes up is what's the difference between a good SE and a great SE?
That would be one of the questions coming up, yes.
So it's, an SEs, their skills on a continuum can go from an SE who leans more towards being almost like a sales rep to an SE that's extremely technical and kind of shies away maybe from the sales end of the spectrum. But a really good, in my mind, a great SE is one who can ask questions about the business as well, who can see the impact or the consequences of the solution on what the customer is trying to do. Not just say, oh, you're asking me for a big pipe or lots of bandwidth or this feature, here's how I can deliver it. But the great SE can think about, if you're trying to accomplish this, maybe I can give you a better solution than the one you're asking for.
Okay.
Right?
So the why question, like why do you want a bigger pipe?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. So, but you talk about the business needs. We're not asking, the SE would not be asking questions about budget or timeline, or in your experience, would they be asking those questions?
Typically, I would say no. Typically, I would say that's the role of the account executive.
Right.
However, SEs create a very different relationship with customers and prospects than account executives do. And in many ways, it's more of a trusted advisor relationship. So sometimes the SE is privy to information that the account executive isn't. And the difference between a good SE and a great SE, a good SE will remember a comment that was made, and it might be about the budget, it might be about the timeline, it might be about someone in the organization who is on board with your solution or on board with the competitor. And so a good SE will make a note of that and bring it back to the account executive, but a great SE will dig in.
Okay.
And I'm not saying give the guy the third degree, but just tell me a little bit more about that. Right?
Right.
I thought the budget for this thing was written in stone and was going to be available, and I just heard you say something different. Tell me a little bit more about that,
Okay. So, my experience tells me that sometimes when we are asked to provide a solution, if we don't know the budget, it's hard to provide a solution that would work for their budget. And, someone is asking for, let's say someone wants to buy a house and they're asking for everything, but their budget is half of what they can afford. Then you try to show them those houses, you're kind of wasting your time, you're wasting their time. So I found it very useful for me to ask budget questions, just because I can actually provide them the option. Like, okay, this is what you want, and this is what your budget allows. Maybe we could do something in between, or which is more important? Can you find more budget? But I've been told by other people that SEs should not be asking questions about budget.
So my personal opinion, right? Just understanding facts about the budget, especially if they're facts that before were unknown to to you and the account executive, I think that's completely a place to very gingerly try to get a little more color from the customer. Setting pricing is probably not something I think most account executives would want their SE doing, right? So talking about this is what you can afford, or because you know what, at the end of the day, you know how skinny people get on a deal, right?
Generally speaking, I don't think an SE should provide a solution on the spot, like during a discovery call, which we will discuss in a bit. But knowing the budget will help him later. And it is generally a question an account manager should be asking. But sometimes if it's not asked, it's good for an SE to ask, or never ask that question as an SE. General rule. Someone's listening out there.
Yeah, and I think every account executive has an idea of how they want that to go, right? And they'll draw the boundaries. But in many ways, I think there's also an approach that's almost like when you walk onto a car lot. The first thing you see is more car than you can handle. They show you something that you would love to have, and you both might know it's not going to work, but they start there because sometimes people find more money.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you can always show them the Cadillac and back down to the Chevrolet.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yep. Show them everything, and then they can pick and choose what they want, provide the options. I guess that would make sense. All right. So we talked a little bit about what makes a good SE, what makes a great SE. You've been in management for a while. What qualities would you be looking, if you were looking to hire an SE, what qualities would you want in that SE to hire him?
So, and I've now had this question a few times, and it's come in a slightly different form. It's like, what is the most important characteristic that a systems engineer can have? And I'll expand on this, but if I had to pick one, it's persistence.
In what sense?
And in the sense that you never stop trying to achieve either success in sales, you never stop trying to achieve success towards personal and professional goals, you never stop developing, you continue to have a hunger for information that impacts technology, market trends, things like that. You never coast.
Okay, so always want to be better. Not necessarily...
Correct.
Not necessarily persistence as in trying to hound the customer to buy something from you.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay, I just want to clarify that.
I think that anybody go out and become a type A personality either.
Yeah.
But it's just a constant and consistent effort to succeed.
Okay.
All right.
Is there another one that you would want to share?
So, in general, what's a good SE? A good SE is someone who has a track record of success, and oftentimes that's most easily measured as performance against quota. So you want to see some of that. You understand after having been in the business that doesn't happen every year. But if somebody has never had that success, that's something to take into consideration. You see someone who's confident in technology and can apply it to customers' business issues. You're looking for somebody with some level of competitive spirit, right? They need to want to achieve, to want to close business. Somebody who will fit in with the team, someone who's respectful, and someone with decent communication skills. I mean, right? I'd say that's a good SC. Okay. That's someone that gets your attention.
How would you qualify that in a interview?
Well, the communication skills would come across one in conversation, but I would typically, if I was hiring somebody, I would ask them to stand up and do a presentation for me.
Okay.
Right? To see how they use PowerPoint, how comfortable they are standing up in front of a room.
How about the persistence and the competitiveness? Is there a way you can actually tell that? And I'm not telling you this so that people can fake it.
You can. You could ask questions about, tell me about your hardest spot, or tell me about the most complex. Everyone can win a big deal, right? Okay. So you can see how they think. Are they competitive? Did someone else lead them around, or did they grab the ball and put it together?
Okay. Did they grab the ball and go ahead with it? All right. What about if it's someone that is not an SE currently and wants to go into an SE role? For example, I was in network design before I got this job as an SE, so how would you have qualified all that information? Same thing? We're having technical difficulties. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to turn off the video if you don't mind, just so we can...
Intermittently. Yep. Sure, absolutely.
Let's see how that works. All right, so I don't know, where were we? I was asking for a aspiring SE, so someone who's not already in that role as an SE. For example, myself, before I went into the SE role, I was in network design. So I didn't have any past performance that you can actually take a look at or anything like that. How would you have qualified that?
You know what? I think that's where you have to use some intuition, but you're looking for certain traits, right? You're looking for communication skills. You're looking for somebody who can, and I'm going to use the word troubleshoot, but kind of reverse engineer from where someone is today to where they were yesterday, and then forward engineer to where they want to be tomorrow. So you have to have somebody that has a very logical or engineering type of mindset. You have to see somebody with some technical aptitude. So that, it's almost kind of like a gut feel. It's got to be somebody that's willing to learn, who's going to fit into the team, and you can see will do everything they can to come up to speed in the shortest time possible.
Okay, that makes sense. We already talked about account executive or account manager a little bit. What I want to do is maybe talk about the different sales cycle stages with the role of the SE versus the role of the RSM or account manager. And maybe we start by explaining what an account manager is, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so an account manager, an account executive, a sales rep, they are the individual who actually owns sales responsibility for a territory or a specific list of customers. And when I say they own the responsibility, typically they are paired with a systems engineer, a pre-sales systems engineer, and we've already talked about that a little bit. But the account executive, quote unquote, owns it because their compensation is much more highly leveraged, meaning that they make the majority of their money only when they are successful in selling something. So they have more at risk, thus they are often referred to as the opportunity owner. Typically, an SE also has some amount of commission in their comp plan, but it's generally materially less than their account executive counterpart. So the guy with the most risk, the guy who has to close the deal to pay his mortgage, that's the account executive.
For SEs, what are the commission splits that are common out there? If you're allowed to share that or you want to share that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say the most common split for a systems engineer is at quota, which most people would call on-target earnings, right? But when you get to, so if your on-target earnings is $100 when you make your quota, the typical split is 70-30. So your base salary, regardless of whether you sell $1 or you make your entire quota, your base salary would be $70. When you fulfilled your quota, you will find that you had been paid $30 and you would have hit your on-target earnings of $100. So 70-30 salary to commission is what I would call the industry standard split. There are some companies who have more conservative splits. Spirent was one of them, with an 80-20 plan.
Go ahead, sorry.
And the difference there, whether you're 70-30 or 80-20 or some other variation, the real difference, I think at the end of the day, is it's more, obviously the more you have that's guaranteed, a lot of people like that, right? I would rather have less at risk than more at risk. what sometimes SEs don't think about, though, is when you have a really, really good year, and typically in any company, sales reps and SEs, after 100% of quota, move into multipliers. So every dollar they sell pays them more than it paid before. So you make a certain amount per dollar up to 100%, and then maybe you make 1.5 times that amount up to 110, and then maybe you make 2.5 times that above 110%. But the less leverage you have to start with, meaning that the smaller that commission percentage, that 20%, the less impact those multipliers have. So when you have a really big year, you want a lot of leverage. You'd rather be on a 70-30 plan, because once you get over 100%, that becomes much more meaningful. It's not that it hurts when you're only at 20, but the delta is material.
It's not something you can choose, though. Each company has its commission structure, I guess you can say. It's not something that an SE can, choose, I want 70-30 or 80-20, or change from year to year. Can they?
That's correct. In general, most companies like the administrative ease of use of having a single split. There are some companies, and they're very much in the minority, who actually view being able to offer different comp plans as flexibility and a benefit to attract talent. So you may have somebody you want to bring on board who is very risk averse and wants an 80-20 or an 85-15, versus there's a very talented SE you want to bring on board and they're like, oh heck no, bring me on at 70-30 or 65-35, because I'm willing to roll the dice that I'm going to blow this thing out, and the more leverage I have, the bigger those commission checks get. So that does happen, but infrequently.
Okay. And you mentioned that the account manager has more at risk. So what is their typical commission structure?
Typically, account managers are 50-50 in my experience. So if they're making $100 at the end of the year when they've hit their quota, all that's guaranteed to them is $50 as a salary. They've got to earn the other half through closing deals. There are some companies where that's even more highly leveraged. You might have a 40-60, but my experience is when you're in the tier 1 or tier 2 technology players, you're probably at a 50-50.
Okay. I've heard other companies, at least here in Ottawa, they do 60-40, so 60 base, 40 commission.
Oh, okay.
It's not very common. It's just one company, which I will not mention here, but yeah. All right. So we started this question by talking about the sales cycle stages and the role of the SE versus the RSM, and we got sidetracked, which is a good thing because that was a good conversation. But excuse me. Generally speaking, the sales cycle has a bunch of different stages, and we can use your definition of them if you want, if you have your own definition, because I find different people have different stage definitions, or stages actually, or I have a list here that we can share. I'm not trying to pop quiz you, so if you have one off the top of your head, that's great. If not, I'll just list them off and we can go through that.
Yeah, tell me what your list consists of.
Okay, well, I have awareness, discovery, selling, agreement, and then closed, which is, I think, self-explanatory, but we can start with awareness if you would like. What's the role of the SE? What's the role of the salesperson? And maybe what the stage is actually.
So my guess is, and these sound a whole lot like Salesforce.
Yes, they are.
Salesforce definitions. So and that's okay. And there's one of the questions at the end. We might come back to Salesforce.
Okay.
Right? Salesforce is the enterprise resource language of most companies, right? So there's nothing wrong with this definition of sales. So awareness, I would say in general, is that there's there's a customer who's aware they have a problem. We are aware they have a problem, and we have agreed to have a conversation about whether we can solve that problem. Right? I would call awareness really nothing more than a warm lead.
How do we know that a customer has a problem?
There will have been some type of interaction,
Like
right? There may have been a phone call or an email.
Okay. Well, maybe we can step back and talk about that. So, let's say it's not a lead that came from external. We decided to cold call a customer. Does the SE have any role in the cold call?
Typically, no. I would say, in this definition, given these categories of a sales process, I would say the SE is really introduced to the system or to this process, typically in discovery.
So, okay. And from your experience, do account managers have enough technical information to know that a customer may have a problem or to know what to talk about with the customer? Or if even there's a fit?
You know what? At the awareness stage, an AE, an account executive, can carry the conversation.
Okay. Sounds good to me. So less work for SE. Good. All right. Moving on to discovery call. Or discovery. The stage. Maybe a quick definition and the role of the SE and the R and this AE. I'm trying to use your terminology versus ours.
Yeah.
Your terminology is way better, but
So, the SE does a lot of heavy lifting it really starts in the discovery phase and then continues in the selling phase, right? So discovery is where you go from, you have a problem, we have a solution, we agree to get together and go to the next level, and that's discovery, right? That's where you dig into the details and the account executive is trying obviously to qualify the opportunity on a sales level, which is, questions like not just what do you think the problem is, but why do you have to solve it? What's the compelling event that's going to make you do something at all? Do you have money to solve the problem? When do you have to solve the problem by? Which decision makers are going to determine the solution? Who's going to sign the check? All of that stuff an account executive is going to be responsible for figuring out through the discovery and sometimes into the selling phase. While the systems engineer is interested in, okay, maybe they're describing a purely technical problem. So that's really straightforward. But sometimes they're talking about a transition to a situation they've never been to before. They're bringing up a new application. They're migrating an application to the cloud. So a system engineer is tasked with understanding, where are you today? What about this situation is either not good or is going to change? Where do you want to be tomorrow? And then how do I address those needs with my products and solutions? And then actually designing that solution for the customer. And typically that entails not just a lot of conversation, and we'll probably come back to what I think is one of the most fundamental behaviors of a successful systems engineer, and that's active listening. So it's not just digging up a lot of information, but it can also be, there's a lot of knowledge transfer, right? Customers know their business real well. They don't always know the technology that makes it work real well. There may be a proof of concept or a demo, right, that has to be given or installed and babysat. And all of that begins in the discovery phase and goes through the selling phase. And then when you get to the agreement phase, right, the customer understands that your solution will work for them. And at that point, I see the SE's role diminishing a little bit and the account executives picking back up, because at that point, we're now talking about, the solution has been solidified and it's now on the account executive to do things like, all right, how are we going to make the economics of this transaction work? Is it a CapEx sale? Is it an operating expense sale, OpEx, meaning it's a lease? How do we get this into procurement? When is it going to come out of procurement? Because at the point that you have a signed purchase order, then it's closed. So agreement really moves into, in my mind, puts the ball back squarely in the AE's court to wrap up the business and economic details of the deal.
Okay. Let's talk about active listening. I find a lot of SEs have problems with that, including myself initially, and I'm still working on that, where I find myself, I don't know if anybody else would share this experience. If a customer is asking me a question and I already know the answer to, I'm in such a hurry to answer that question that I kind of miss the rest of his statement or question. So that's a common. Go ahead.
No, you know what? That's very common. And even though I can tell you, I think active listening is very important, it's something that does not come natural to most people. You have to consciously work at it. And maybe after a long period of time, it becomes reflexive. But it basically breaks down to 5 tenets or 5 behaviors. So, and the whole premise of active listening, in my mind, is the fact that we have to challenge the assumption that what the customer is telling us is accurate and that we are understanding it accurately. The customer's knowledge, their ability to, and they're not doing anything on purpose, but you just realize, especially in a complex business like technology, the customer is in 20 minutes trying to tell you something that has evolved in their professional environment, maybe over weeks or months, right? It's a very distilled conversation. The conversation itself, the information or facts that the customer passes along are constrained by their own knowledge of their business, of their role in their business, of technology. It's constrained and influenced by other people in their company who have more or less education about technology or about business process. And it's certainly influenced by the way they talk about their business and technology, right? Every industry, every company has their own lingo. So while the customer could be saying something very straightforward and you might get to end a job even with your active listening skills and nothing changed, the fact of the matter is there are typically underrepresented or misstated facts through no fault of the customers that you can uncover that will help you to present a better and more competitive solution. So first and foremost, number one, you want to be in the moment. You're there to listen. You're there to pay attention, to make it a very comfortable conversation. Be mindful of your body language. Encourage information exchange. Secondly, and this is where most of us fall right apart, right, is keep an open mind and don't rush to judgment. You hear the question you can answer, or you hear a problem described that you know you can solve, and your first reaction is, I can answer this, I can add value, I can prove to the customer we can do what they want. But you have to keep that impulse at bay and not rush to respond or resolve a problem. So the active components here are to reflect or restate what the customer is telling you. So key points, key pain points, key goals, play those back to the customer. One, that helps you confirm that you are accurately comprehending the information they're providing. But it also shows the customer that you're paying attention, that you're listening, and you're interested. You can also and should ask open-ended clarifying and probing questions. So this is your license to elicit more information from the customer than maybe they were planning on sharing. Not that they were hiding it, it just wasn't in their prepared remarks. So you told me X happened. Tell me a little bit more about that, right? Or, okay, then what happened? Give them an opportunity to share more with you. Give them an opportunity to maybe explain something that's a little bit murky. Shine a light in all the corners. And again, this is you demonstrating that you're listening and that you have the customer's best interests at heart. And after you've gone through that, now you can start to compose your thoughts and talk to the customer about the approach or the perspective that you might use to solve their problems. And one of the things that can be, I see used successfully is to have a little bit of a narrative around I've seen this before, or we had a customer who thought they had a similar problem, but in fact, maybe they didn't. But now you start to share your knowledge and experience with the customer. And what you might find is that you now have information that either points to a bigger problem or a different problem, or a way that your company can solve a problem that others can't, simply by reframing the problem, giving the customer a different perspective. So during discovery, active listening skills are invaluable, and I would say that's what one of the differentiators between a great SE and a good SE. But the other place active listening skills come in, and this is just as difficult, a situation is when the customer is raising objections, right? And first and foremost, never raise an objection, right? The customer will come up with plenty on their own. You don't ever, I hate going into a meetings and you hear somebody, whether it's the account executive or the SE or some other individual, say, well, we don't have this yet, but we still have a pretty good product. Or as you know, we're late to the market with X. Well, you know what? Maybe they didn't know.
Or our solution is too expensive for you.
Yeah, exactly. Or yes. Or many people consider us the Cadillac and we're too expensive. Never raise an objection. You'll get a chance to address it if it's a big deal. But when it comes, Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that's a very good point because I hate to admit it, I thought it was good to be honest with the customer, as in like show some trust. But there are other ways to show trust with the customer, like basically don't lie to him. Just don't shoot yourself in the foot before you even get the chance to tell them what you can do, because maybe they can pay more, or maybe partial solution would actually work for them if you cover 99% of their problems.
Right, absolutely. Maybe, when you talk about budgets and things like that, so there's a point in time amount of money, but there's also funds that might be available over multiple points in time. So maybe you end up designing a Cadillac solution, you just sell it over 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, objection handling. I mean, the number one rule is let the customer come up with the objections. But when they do, this is another chance to, and this is tough because it's tough when it's like someone telling you your baby's ugly, right? It's hard not to get defensive and just have a, oh, well, that's not important, or, what you want to do is dig into why is that an objection? Again, this is a great place for open-ended questions. Tell me more about why you need this feature, right? And sometimes you'll find out they really don't know why they need the feature. It's just our competitor told them they did because our competitor knew we didn't have it. Or maybe they don't know that there are alternatives. Maybe there's a different and better solution to what that feature provides. And with open-ended questions, you can get closer to the real reason that it's an objection. And maybe you still end up handling it head on. But sometimes you also find a way to, kind of outflank that objective with an even better solution. And that's when you get the customer to go, oh, that's interesting. Now you've got their attention.
So you would actually ask the question of why you actually need that, or how, like you would handle the objection like that, versus try to figure out other ways that the product does work, because there's always a chance of the customers proving that they actually need it and they need it more than they actually thought.
And sometimes an objection is exactly what it is on face value, right? But sometimes it's just like during the discovery phase. You can either take everything at face value and potentially miss something, or you can listen and ask a few questions and either find out the situation is somewhat or maybe a lot different, or confirm that it's exactly as it is, as you would take it at face value. But I don't think most customers are going to get upset if you say, well, tell me a little bit more about that, right? Unless you've already had the conversation and now you're being redundant.
Well, no, I'm not worried about upsetting most customers are not easily, like if you're asking questions, like you said, unless you're asking the same question over and over and just not understanding or not taking notes, they might get upset. But a lot of them understand that they need to give us information for SEs to provide solutions. But my concern would be asking them the question, and you already answered that. But I'm just restating what I already did. Like, if you ask a question, let's say they had an objection, and you ask a little bit more about the objection, versus focusing on what they have not objected yet, try to make them realize that actually is more important than what their objection is about.
It's possible, and that's a fair point. You have to put that, any objection that comes up, you have to put it in perspective, right? Is this a deal breaker? Is this a nice to have?
I guess that's part of the SE skill set, trying to understand. There is no, here's the thing about being an SE, there is no set law that you would use. I've talked to different SEs who, like in discovery calls, they may use PowerPoint slides to do their discovery. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think about PowerPoint slides in a discovery call?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I can picture how that would be helpful.
Well, it would be called the spray and pray method.
You mean just like do a whole product overview and see if something resonates?
I've seen that happen in the past, and it worked in the sense, but a lot of times I look at customers' faces and they're just glazed over. So yeah, you learn from your mistakes. So
Yeah, no, and that's yeah. I don't unless the customer has said, "What I want as part of this meeting is, tell me something about Spirent, tell me something about your products." Then then perhaps half a dozen, 7, 8 slides might be in order to kickstart the conversation. I do think, I could certainly see benefit to an SE having, and I'll even call it a checklist, right? There are certain things I want to walk out of this meeting understanding. And some of it could be speeds and feeds. But there probably are some things that every SE is trying to come away from a discovery call with, and to have a checklist to make sure that you gather all the information you think you need, that certainly seems like a reasonable tool.
okay, sounds good. All right, we've covered all this. We're at the 50-minute mark, and I want to respect your time. So we're going to move on to the not-so-fire round.
Okay.
Where I ask the questions quickly, and you take your time answering them if you want.
All right.
So, other than a notebook and a pen, what is an essential tool that NSE should be using?
And I'm not sure this is where you think this question's going to go, but I think an essential tool every SE should use is their company's ERP system, and just to give it a name in general, it's Salesforce. Most companies use that to track their business, and SEs are in the business of sales. I can't imagine an SE not wanting to understand how their account executive partner is portraying their business up the food chain to the company. Right? That's we might have a little bit less leverage than that account executive, but we still have money we want to make, and understanding what they are committed to, right? And they're committing us to that as well. We have shared responsibility with them for closing the business they say we're going to close. I think that's absolutely something every SE should be interested in. Now, the company may ask you to do different things with Salesforce, but just from an understanding the business you're involved in and how that's being presented to the rest of the company, that's something every systems engineer should do.
That's a fair answer. Basically, any tool that you have in your mind that SE should be using is the question, and that's the answer you gave me. So I like the answer. Not sure a lot of SEs would like the answer, but all right. So, is there a book or an online resource that you believe every SE should read or be subjected to?
So I think every SE should have some type of information feed that regularly gives them headlines and updates on what's happening with technology and with business. Maybe it's certain verticals. And that's probably going to be something published online. Although actually I'm a pretty big fan of podcasts, only because I can listen to them while I'm driving, while I'm exercising. it doesn't necessarily detract from my office time, right? I don't necessarily have to take time out of my calendar to catch up on what's going on. So I like the podcast approach. I'm not a big fan of recommending books because everyone gets different value from different things. I feel like if I was going to say what's a book I've read in the last year or two that I think most people would get something from, it might be the Phoenix Project, which is a story that I think I was surprisingly able to be drawn into, and it basically highlights through real life activity how the DevOps movement came to be. That might be as far as I could go with a business book. On the other hand, I love to read, and I love to read real books, not ebooks, but I do that for pleasure.
Okay. Novels more than...
Yep.
Yep. Do you know of any other podcast for SEs or sales in general that would be useful for SEs?
Well, I'll tell you a couple that I really like, and they are basically in the cybersecurity world. One of them is called the Cyberwire, which is a daily news feed of what's going on in the cybersecurity world. And then it's now a monthly podcast called the Darknet Diaries. And instead of just being a blurb about this company got hacked, it tells the whole story, which is generally way more interesting than just the headline. So those are two podcasts that I keep up with on a regular basis.
Right, I'll check those out. Any tips and tricks for time management or task organizations, considering SEs get a lot of requests from different customers and account managers?
Absolutely. Prioritize ruthlessly.
Nice.
You have to figure out what's most important. And some things will never get to the top of the list. You have to accept that. You have to keep a running and living list because it will change from morning to night. But then to go along with that, for all the stakeholders of those activities, you need to set and manage and then exceed expectations. So if a customer asks you to do something and you know that it's probably going to take 2 or 3 days, first of all, don't leave the impression that you're going to get to it right away. Set a very explicit expectation. Generally, I can get this done by the end of today, but sometimes the folks on the coast don't return my call until the following business day, so it could be tomorrow. But what I'll do is I'll launch this inquiry, and if I don't have an answer by the end of the day, I'll drop you a quick note and let you know that it's still in progress, and then we'll touch base on Tuesday. So I think that's very important, and you do that with customers, you do that with your account executive. You're very clear and crisp on what it is you're committing to do and when you're committing to have it done by. And if it slips, you got to let them know as soon as possible, right? Most people would rather deal with a slip than stand there wondering if anything is happening at all. So prioritize ruthlessly and then set, manage, and exceed expectations.
Sounds good to me. And last question of the not so fire round. Is there an advice that you would give an SE that you don't feel they're getting it from anybody else?
I think I would tell anyone who would listen, especially SEs, perfection is very, very expensive, and it's very, very rarely required for success. I see too many SEs who beat themselves up because they're trying to know everything in the world or do everything in the world, and to do it perfectly, and that just doesn't scale. Perfection doesn't scale, and like I say, it's rarely required for success. So, don't kill yourself. Do it well. Do it to the best of your abilities. Most SEs will be well above average, but the goal of perfection comes with too high a price tag for too little return.
You just put a big smile on my face. We're coming to the 1 hour mark. Actually, we passed the 1 hour mark. I don't know. Do you still have 5 more minutes or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, right now we're going to questions that I got from my quote unquote listeners. Basically, I emailed a bunch of friends and they sent me questions. They turned out to be good. Who knew I have good friends with good questions? Hopefully, they don't listen to this. So, I'm just gonna ask them. The first question was coming from a network design engineer. He was asking, how do you deal with being in unfamiliar situations or being asked questions that you're expected to know but you don't yet know?
And in this case, the expectations that you have that knowledge is coming from whom? The customer?
The customer. So his situation, he's a brand new network design engineer. He just moved into this team, and whenever you move to this team, you're automatically an expert when you go on customer sites. Excuse me. So how would you, for a brand new SE, go into a customer site and the customer is expecting him to know everything or as much as possible? How would they deal with that?
Yeah, that's got to be tough, and I would like to think that the onus for solving that problem would not solely fall on the network engineer, because that network engineer's company understands where he is on the learning curve, and they shouldn't be putting him in positions where he can't find some measure of success. So you would like to think the company would let him shadow a more senior network engineer, or that he would have a ride along for some period of time so that he could defer to another resource when he didn't know, because I don't see a benefit to the network engineer or to a customer if they sit there for 20 minutes and questions are asked and then the response is, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, but let me take a note and I'll get back to you. So certainly everyone at some point ends up in a position where they're asked a question they don't know the answer to, and the right answer at that moment is, hey, I don't know the answer to that, but I know somebody that does, and I will ask them and I'll get back to you. Then you do your set, manage, and exceed expectations. But gosh darn, I hope this person isn't being thrown to the lions on a regular basis.
So let's say that I don't think he is, but let's say that he is in this example. Would you encourage him to actually go talk to his manager and request that?
I think that conversation would certainly be in bounds.
So don't be afraid of your manager. Ask for what you need. That goes for everybody. Right?
Well, no, you want, right, and managers are like any other people. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. And maybe the most you can do is hope they do no harm, but you should assume your manager is going to be supportive. And my argument would be, you know what, if you put me in a position where I seem to know nothing, one, that probably reflects worse on the company than it does on the individual, right? A customer can understand that you're brand new at the job. The customer doesn't understand why XYZ company can't send someone out, that can answer the questions.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So question number 2. This is coming from a design engineer, so a software design engineer. they're coming up with new products, and there's a push in their company to actually sell those new products versus the older products. How should an SE go around learning that, or focusing on that more than the old products? Although the old products help them to get their quota faster.
Yeah, that's tough, and that's a challenge across the technology industry, right? Is that people in sales think with their wallets, right?
Yes.
If my comp plan says this is how you're going to make money, that's what I do. And if the comp plan doesn't say sell these new products, then what you're going to take the path of least resistance.
So the onus is on the company to provide them with incentives to sell those products?
You know what? That helps. Now, having said that, there is a school of thought or an argument, if you will, that says, I pay you a base salary, and that's not just to breathe. That's to be a good corporate citizen. And so if I ask you to try to change a behavior that may not have a direct influence on revenue, assuming that it doesn't significantly impair your ability to hit the sales quota I asked you to hit, then please make an effort to sell these new products. Now, that argument is never as strong as actual economic incentive. But someone will bring up the good corporate citizen argument, and it's not without merit, but the best way is for the company to make the transition lucrative.
Okay. Yeah, that's always the case for SEs, especially since there's a base salary. We're more employees than solopreneurs, right? We do have to help other SEs. We do have to do what the company wants because it's a base salary. It's a good salary, even if it's just the base, from my experience, for people in sales.
Yeah, it certainly would be more, that request would resonate more, be more likely to be picked up by an SE just for the reasons you mentioned. But the SE is also always pressured by their account executive, and he or she is not as influenced by the good corporate citizen argument. They're influenced by the fact that I know I can sell this old product all day long and hit by number. And I don't understand this new thing. I don't know why people would buy it, and it's just going to drag me down. And therefore, until someone, gets in my grill about it, I'm probably just going to ignore this.
Very good point. All right. Final question. This is from me, the listener. So the SE's job, SE has a lot of things to do. He has to meet new customers, visit previous customers to continue the relationship, prepare for POCs and demos, and learn new technology and new products. How much time would you recommend that an SE would allocate to learning those new products and technologies?
That's a good question. And I guess I could spitball something, and I have had this discussion with other SEs and even with other account executives. Because in general, even though it's not always apparent, the account executives understand that the SEs need time to learn the products. They need time to keep up with new software revision. They need time to absorb new knowledge. So, is it 2 hours a week? In my mind, probably the starting point for the conversation is somewhere between 2 and 4 hours a week. I think 4 hours is probably the outer edge when you think about that as being half a day. But if that half a day also includes, direct sales related things like preparing for a POC or a demo, as well as new knowledge acquisition, I think 2 hours might be the minimum. And my recommendation would be to just have an agreement with the AE, just like maybe you have a cadence every Monday morning to cover what's going to happen the coming week. Just agree that every Friday from 2 to 4, that's your development time. It's on the calendar, and unless there's a really good reason why something should be scheduled over it, that's your time during the week to catch up with what's going on.
I think that's good. And yeah, I have a lot more questions for you, Bill. I feel like I can talk to you for hours, considering we only went through half of what I sent you. So, but this is excellent. I'm very happy I had the chat with you. Maybe we'll do this again some other time.
I'd be happy, and I would love to keep up with the other people that you talk to. I think this is a very creative way to learn more or to get more perspectives on what it means to be a good SE.
That was my conversation with Bill McCarel. I hope you guys enjoyed. As he mentioned in the interview, a very important aspect of being a sales engineer is listening to the customer. Here's my challenge to you guys. I would like for you to pay attention to how you listen while in a meeting. Are you busy thinking of an answer to the question that you don't actually get to hear the rest of the question? Have you ever interrupted a customer because you know the answer? Has your brain ever wandered off somewhere else during a meeting, since they're talking about commercials or something you don't deem interesting? These are all things I've been guilty of in the past, and I've worked hard to overcome. If you've never done that, that's great. If you have and you've overcome them, please let us know in the comment section on the show notes page, which you can find at WeTheSalesEngineers.com show 1. It's been a pleasure talking to Bill and having you listen. I hope you enjoyed. And don't forget to spread the word through ratings and reviews if you think this is useful. This is Ramsey, signing off.